He said, "Don't come." When I got there, the train had pulled out of the station. The sky was ashen, and the snowflakes that fell were not as soft as they seemed. They were cold as steel, sharp as knives, cutting into my skin in small, painful cuts. I sat there, on the cold, hot wooden bench, where my last dream dissolved into white smoke that came out of my mouth every time I breathed. $17 in my pocket, an old dress, a pair of shoes not meant for the frozen soil of the Wild West. No place to stay, no acquaintances, no reason to stay, but nowhere to go. Can you imagine? Being rejected with a note less than a line long changed my mind. Don't come. Sorry. 7 words. 7 words that killed 3 months of hope. 3 months of handwritten letters. 3 months of imagining a man who could be my last resort. My name is Violet Ashford. I was a teacher literature, music, and ethics to the daughters of the rich in a prestigious school in Philadelphia. I was respected. I was invited to tea parties with ladies who wouldn't look at me now if they knew what my father had done. He stole church money, played cards until he was broke, and dragged me, his daughter, down into the mud of scandal. No one would hire a teacher who was the daughter of a thief from God. No family would let their daughter study with someone like me. I sold everything: my dresses, my books, my mother's jewelry to buy a train ticket, all for one name: William Garrett, a man from the West, writing to say he needed a wife who was good, who could read, who could teach children, who could be quiet when necessary. And I accepted, not out of love, but out of desperation. I didn't think I would be loved. I just wanted to be needed. And now, I don't have that. The station master looked at me through the frosted glass. I knew what he was thinking. Everyone in town knew. The news spread like a cold wind. A rejected mail-order bride, a good-for-nothing from the East, a fat prey for idle foul-mouthed cowboys. A group of men rode by on horseback, the sound of their hooves kicking up dirty snow on my skirt. One of them sneered, "There's room in the stable." "Girl." The laughter followed like a dagger in my back. I didn't reply. I just tightened my grip on the strap of my bag. There was nothing in it but a pair of torn gloves and 2 pictures of my mother, but my hand held on tight, as if I let go, I would shatter into 100 pieces. Across the street, the girls in makeup stood in front of the saloon. Laughing, they looked at me, then whispered something. Maybe I would have to do the same to get by. Maybe I wouldn't make it through tomorrow. And what about you? If it were you, sitting in the freezing cold, with your last 17 in your pocket, what would you do? A ticket back to Philadelphia? With your reputation in tatters? No home, no job, or do anything just to survive? The wind cut my cheek like a thin knife. I stood up. The blood stopped flowing at my fingertips. 1 step, then another. But where to? "Ma'am." Only I spun around. A man, thick mouse-colored coat, green eyes, dark hair, tanned skin. There was something about him, not city gentility, but the quiet self-possession of someone used to facing wolves and snow. "The train left almost an hour ago. You know?" "I know." My voice was as cold as the wind. I didn't need any more pity. He didn't smile, didn't disdain, didn't judge, just nodded. "My name is James Whitmore. I own a ranch about 10 miles from here. Triple Crown Ranch. I looked at him, expected teasing, contempt, but saw understanding. "You're Violet Ashford, right?" The question was a deadly blow. How did he know? How? "I have nothing to tell you," I whispered, but my feet didn't move. My hands were still on the strap of my bag. Bill Garrett was my neighbor. Knew him for a long time. Drunk. thoughtless. What he did to you, wrong, very wrong. End. I should have turned away. I should have run, but I stood there, because for the first time in months, someone had said I deserved to be treated well. The boarding house is full. James continued, I know. I tried. You need a place to stay. I need a teacher. End. I froze. 8 kids. Ages 6 to 14. Not much going on. I need someone to teach them the basics. I'll pay. Decent housing. Real work. Lou. And you know what? Sometimes, what keeps a woman from hitting rock bottom isn't pity. It's an offer that's kind enough not to offend. Serious enough to be believable. I don't know what I'll be tomorrow, but today, I said yes. Because when you're standing in the middle of the ice, with the whole world turning its back on you, sometimes all you need is someone who won't walk away. Someone who says, I see you, and you're still worth it. The snow was still falling silently as James Whitmore's sleigh took me out of Cheyenne station. The old white pines receded into a wide-open valley, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. The silence between James and I stretched, heavy as the snow beneath me. I had never been with a stranger in such circumstances. Part of me was wary, afraid. But another part, the part that had just been through the depths of humiliation, clung to this fragile opportunity like a lifeline in a cold sea. Where did you teach? James asked, his eyes fixed on the dim road ahead. Philadelphia. I replied, my voice barely concealing the bitterness. Miss Porter's. For young ladies of good families. He nodded, but said nothing more. Didn't ask why I was leaving. Didn't seem surprised to see an elegant teacher huddled in a thin coat in this harsh land. The silence strangely felt better than any words of pity. Why are you helping me? I blurted. A stranger. Abandoned. With no money. No future. I have nothing to offer you. No. James sat up straight, his hands tightening on the reins. Not everyone needs a reason to do the right thing. No. I chuckled. Soundless. A laugh that carried no conviction. You don't believe me, he said. Not a question. And I don't blame you. No. I looked at him, carefully. This man was unlike anyone I had ever met. Not the rich man who lived for parties and flattery, nor the rough-hewn cowboy I had expected to meet in the West. He had the calmness of someone who had known pain, but who had not let it control him. What do you know about me besides my name? I asked. James answered without hesitation. I know you came here with hope. I know Garrett crushed that hope. And I know what it's like to have someone else determine your worth. I paused. Perhaps he had said it more to himself than to me. And you? Who are you? Really? I asked, revealing my doubt for the first time. The rancher, he said simply. The one who pays the salary. The one who needs a teacher for the kids. No one else wants to teach. That's it? James was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was so low and real that I forgot the cold. I came to Wyoming to start over. There are mistakes in life that you can't fix. You can only learn to live with. I don't need you to believe me. Just do your job well. If after a month you don't feel like a good fit, I'll send you somewhere else, with a letter of recommendation. But if you stay, he paused. If you stay, he repeated, you might have a chance to start over. We said nothing more for the rest of the drive. The wind whipped against my face, reminding me that I was still in the middle of winter. Not out of danger, but strangely enough, I was no longer completely cold. When I reached Triple Crown Farm, the sight that unfolded before me took me by surprise. Rows of wooden houses, scattered like pieces of a winter puzzle. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, mixed with the mooing of cows. The sound of doors opening and closing. This was another world, a living world, where people had no time to fall down forever. A woman appeared at the front door, tall, with prematurely grey hair, her eyes cold as frost. She looked at me as if she were sorting through an item she had bought at a flea market. "You're a teacher?" she asked, not bothering to hide her suspicion. "I used to be." James stepped forward, his voice firm. "She'll be in the East Room. Please arrange things." The woman nodded, reluctantly. As she turned away, James said softly, "That's Helena Caldwell. She keeps things running smoothly here. Tough. But fair." I followed her into the house, realizing I was entering a whole new life. No guarantee it would be good, but no worse than the one I'd just left. That evening, as I sat alone in the simple but cozy living room, I looked out the frosted window. Outside, James was standing alone in the middle of the yard, his back straight, his head held high. He didn't look like a man on the run, but he didn't look exactly like a man standing still. He was a question, and I, despite all that I had lost, despite the fear of being betrayed by the people I trusted the most, found myself wanting to know the answer. What would you do if the only person who reached out to pull you out of the abyss was someone who carried a nameless secret? Would you dare to trust a stranger if your past was a knife wound from behind? I don't have the answer, but I do know one thing. I chose not to turn back. And for the first time in months, I no longer felt like I was just existing. I was living, and maybe starting over. The morning light quietly filtered into the small classroom through the frosted window, covering the rough wooden desks in a soft yellow. The smell of new wood, the smell of cold ash from last night's wood stove, and a hint of young hope permeated the air. I stood in front of the blackboard, holding the chalk in my hand, my heart filled with excitement and fear. Once again, I was a teacher, but this time, there were no neat uniforms, no young ladies bowing their heads in obedience. The children here had no foundation, no discipline. No one had taught them how to bow to authority. 8 pairs of eyes looked at me with 8 different colors of skepticism. In the front row was Maria Gonzalez, 6 years old, her hair braided on both sides, her eyes cautious, her hands gripping the edge of the desk as if ready to run away at any moment. Next to them were the twins Jake and Luke Fletcher, wide grins, mischievous eyes, as if every second in this class was torture unless he had something to play with. At the back of the class was Tommy O'Brien, 14, towering over the others, chin tilted back, arms crossed over his chest, as if to say, "You have nothing to teach me." End of 4. And in the middle was Annie, 10, dark blonde hair, eyes as blue as a frozen lake. She said nothing. No expression, just sat straight, hands folded neatly on the table, like a little statue made of flesh. I took a deep breath. "Hello, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "My name is Violet Ashford, and today, we're starting something new." No one answered. Only Jake chuckled as Luke drew a devil face on the blackboard behind me. I ignored him and continued. "I want to know who you are. Each of you tell me your name, age, and what you like best." Maria was the first, raising her hand slightly, as if afraid of being scolded for speaking up. "I'm Maria. I'm 6. I like to cook with my mum." I smiled. "So what do you know how to make?" "Cornbread and bean soup." Very good. You know, cooking is math, because you have to measure every spoon and bowl. And reading, because you have to remember the recipe. Maria chuckled. And I remembered one thing. With children, Teaching the familiar is always more effective than teaching the esoteric. Each child spoke their names, each little piece of information, forming a mosaic of life here. Jake and Luke loved chasing rabbits. Peter Schmidt, 12, was good at math, but couldn't read a paragraph without making mistakes. Sarah Chun was slower, speaking English mixed with a few Chinese words, but her eyes were intelligent. Then came Tommy O'Brien, 14. I don't like anything, and I don't need to study. I work more on the pasture than anyone in this class. Are you going to do that for the rest of your life? I asked gently. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong. But if you want to own your own farm someday, you'll need to write letters to cow buyers, read quotes, calculate profits. Right? The boy sneered. My dad can do it without studying. And he'll be proud if I do it better than him. There. Tommy said nothing more, but the challenging arch of his eyebrows told me I haven't won. Teacher. I turned back to Annie. Annie Sullivan. I said softly, is there anything you want to share? She was quiet. Some of the kids giggled, but I didn't scold. I just bent down to my desk, took out a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, and put them on Annie's desk. If you don't want to talk, you can draw. There. Annie looked at me for a long time, then slowly reached for the pencil. While the others did simple math problems, Annie was intently sketching. I walked around the classroom, assisting each small group, feeling the small pieces of my heart slowly being put together at Miss Porter. I taught upper-class children how to behave, so they could enter balls and marry into the great families. Here, I taught them to live, to survive. When the bell rang for recess, Annie walked up to the teacher's desk and handed me the paper. A horse was drawn with strong, delicate lines. The mane was flying. The eyes were big and intelligent. The hooves were kicking the snow as if they were about to jump off the page. I was surprised. What a beautiful horse. Have you named it yet? Annie didn't say anything. She just turned her head and pointed out the window. I looked. A black horse stood in a nearby stable, sleek and strong-hoofed, looking toward the classroom. Thunder, a voice said from the door. I turned. Tommy stood there, no longer arrogant. That horse belongs to Mr. Whitmore. Annie often comes to look at it after school. Oh, I looked at Annie, smiling. You're a good observer. Maybe you'll be a good artist or a good veterinarian someday. Oh, Annie's lips pursed, as if considering. Then, for the first time since the beginning of the class, she spoke softlier, faint. But real sound. I like thunder. Zen. The class fell silent. Tommy looked at Annie as if he'd seen a miracle. Maria gasped. Jake and Luke touched hands as if to make sure they weren't dreaming. I put a hand lightly on Annie's shoulder. I like thunder, too, and I like your pictures. Zen. The class ended with more excited footsteps. Little math problems solved. Clumsy letters put together into sentences for the first time. And for the first time in a long time, I felt recognized, not for my fame, not for my name, but for what I could do for someone. That night, as I stood by the window looking at the lights of the little shacks, I didn't think about William Garrett. I didn't think about Philadelphia. I thought about Maria, about Tommy, about Annie, and the look in her eyes when thunder appeared in the picture. Sometimes, to heal our own hearts, we need to start with someone else's little heart. There was no snow that morning, but it was cold enough to burn my face. I was correcting Annie's writing when I heard the sound of galloping hooves in the distance. The children heard it too, and they all looked out the window, their faces anxious as if some unnatural wind were blowing. I stepped out onto the porch of the classroom. A man rode into the farmyard on horseback. his coat dusty, his hat pulled down low, but his posture arrogant. Under the cloak, he recognized him, William Garrett, the man who had ruined me with 7 words, left me at the station like a defective product. James emerged from the stables, his face hard as he recognized the man on the horse. He stood still, but every nerve was as taut as a bowstring. Not because I was afraid of Garrett. It was because of the way James stepped forward, quietly, resolutely, as if he knew an old chapter was about to be turned. "Whitmore," Garrett called out, his voice as harsh as the sound of wheels on stone. "I hear you're taking in the extras. I just came to see how my bad boy's doing." James said nothing. No anger. No wave of his hand. He just looked at Garrett, as if trying to determine if he was still human. "You're taking that piece of trash into your home? You must have strange tastes." Garrett chuckled, glancing at me. James took another step. "Get off my land. End of." "I'll go," Garrett said, his voice slurring. "But first, I've brought some news. Got it yesterday on the train from the east. The Boston paper. It's a treasure." "No." He pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket. But I recognized it as a page. Garrett read aloud, his voice dramatic. "James Whitmore III, son of the Whitmore tycoon, mysteriously disappeared after the death of his business partner, Thomas Hartwell. Rumors suggest a financial dispute preceded Hartwell's death. Boston police suspect a motive for the murder." "And for?" I froze. Garrett, continue. His voice hard. "Sound familiar? James, or should I say, young Master James Whitmore III. Didn't you ever tell that respected teacher that you were once considered a Boston murderer?" The entire campground held its breath. "Carlos." "Big Jim." Helena emerged from the house, hands paused on tools, eyes focused on the 2 men standing face to face in the middle of the yard. James didn't deny it, didn't argue. He just pulled out the familiar silver pocket watch, opened the lid, and looked at the small picture inside, as if looking back at a deeply buried past. "Leave." "Bill," James said, his voice low, but as firm as a judge's gavel. "Not tell her about your runaway, about the broken wedding, about the false testimony from your ex-fiancé. Does she still think you're just an honest cowboy?" Garrett laughed. But as James stepped forward, his eyes flickered. "I didn't kill Thomas Hartwell," James said, his eyes no longer gentle like the one I knew, but the eyes of a man who had survived his own downfall. "But yes, he ran away. I couldn't face the court. The lies, the media. He let fear consume me." Garrett waved his hand. "So you're no different from a murderer." James didn't respond, but a cold current ran through us all. I wanted to step forward, to say something, but my legs were frozen. My insides were churning. The man who had saved me, who had seen value where I thought there was none, was actually a fugitive from murder charges. And then, before Garrett could open his mouth again, James took another step, clenched his fist, and punched him square in the face. Garrett fell back into the snow, blood streaming from his nose. "That's for what you said to her," James said, turning and walking away. Garrett scrambled to his feet, his voice slurring with hatred. "You'll regret it. I swear it. The whole of Wyoming will know who you are. And when the law comes calling, don't expect me to keep my mouth shut." Garrett mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. The snow fell silently again, covering the tracks. But it couldn't fill the silence. I walked toward James. He stood still, his eyes still on the fading silhouette of the horse in the mist. When he turned back, I saw that his eyes were no longer hidden, just the sheer exhaustion of someone who has lived too long in his own shadow. I didn't kill anyone, he said, his voice low and breathless. But I ran away, and now it's time to face it. There's one. I didn't know what lay ahead, but in that moment, I understood that some people make mistakes, not because they're bad, but because they no longer believe that justice belongs to those who tell the truth. As for me, I've been defined by the world's mistakes once, so I know what it's like to be swallowed up by a story that's not yours. And maybe it's time for me to learn to trust once again, but this time with my own mind and my own heart. Just 3 days after my encounter with Garrett, the snow began to fall again, as if to bury all of our pasts under a thick layer of white. And in those 3 days, I realized that James was not just the man who gave me the job, or the man with the dark past. He was the man I did not want to leave, even though the truth might still have many layers to uncover. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was sorting through my books in the classroom, James walked in. He didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, looking at me for a long time, as if he was memorizing every detail of my face. Then he walked over and took something small, round, and silver from his pocket. Not a ring. It was the familiar pocket watch. He opened it. But this time he didn't look at the picture of Caroline inside. Instead, he took it out. He took out the old picture, put it in his pocket, and placed the watch on the teacher's desk. I used to carry this around as a reminder of how betrayed I was, how I lost everything, he said, his voice low. But today, I want to start over. Oh, I looked at him, still not understanding. Violet Ashford, James continued, his eyes fixed on me, unwavering. Do you agree to stay here? Not just as a teacher to the children, but as my companion, under this roof, on this land, even if the past comes back, even if the future is uncertain. I didn't need time to think, because I had lived in waiting for so long, waiting for someone to recognize my worth, waiting for something good to come. And James was the answer to all the coldest winters in my heart. I do, I whispered, not because I need shelter, but because I choose to stay. We decided to get married within a week. No fancy wedding dresses, no melodious music or guests from faraway places. But there was Helena setting the table, and the children preparing bouquets of pressed wildflowers as wedding gifts. And there were Carlos, Big Jim, Mary, Peter, and the farmhands standing in a line in front of the main house, each holding a small candle, braving the cold wind. I wore the simplest dress I had left. James wore a white shirt and the old leather jacket I had seen him in when he went to the stables. Nothing flashy, but no one doubted that our feelings for each other were real. When the vows were read, everyone was silent. James held my hand, his eyes as steady as ever. I promise not to let the past define our present, he said. And if the darkness ever comes again, I will not run. I will stand there, with you by my side, to face it. I squeezed his hand, whispering back, and I promise I won't let anyone else write our story. Not Garrett, not the rumors, not a single page in the papers. We kissed amid the awkward clapping of the children, Elena's emotional sighs, and Mary's tearful eyes. That was the moment I thought, finally, I've reached peace. But peace is always the most fragile thing. We hadn't even taken off our wedding coats, hadn't even sat down to dinner, when the sound of horses' hooves rang out from the yard, not as brisk as Garrett's, but hurried, urgent, and carrying something very different, the smell of bad news. Sheriff Morrison entered the yard with 3 strangers in heavy coats and gloves. One had a federal insignia pinned to his chest. The wind whipped up snow that trailed behind them like a white smoke. James walked out the front door, me following close behind. "Why are you here today?" James asked. His voice still calm, as if he had just walked through a wedding. Sheriff Morrison took off his hat, his face heavy. "I'm sorry to say this. Caroline Peaton is dead." I heard the words clearly, but it took a few seconds for my brain to process their meaning. The name Caroline was a shadow that still hovered over James. Now that he was dead. "She committed suicide?" James asked, his eyes narrowing. "A dose of poison was found by her bedside. But there was a letter, and one of the 3 feds held out an envelope. Morrison took it." Looking straight at James. "In the letter, she accuses you of threatening her, that if she ever reveals anything more about the Thomas Hartwell case, you won't let her live until tomorrow." End back. I opened my mouth, speechless. "That's slander," James said immediately. "I haven't left the farm all week. The whole town can testify. We believe it," Morrison said. "But with this letter and the unnatural death, federal law requires an investigation. And that means, James, you have to come with us." I stepped forward, blocking James's way. "He's just married. You can't. We have to follow the law." "Mrs. Whitmore," the Fed said, their eyes not unkind, but as cold as the iron handcuffs they carried. James put his hand on my shoulder. "I won't run. Not again. It's time to end this shadow." He kissed my forehead, as if saying goodbye without using the word. Then he turned and followed them to their horses. The snow continued to fall. Each flake was a pure white curse, cast on what should have been the most sacred day of our lives. Caroline Peaton was dead. She had not lived to avenge, but her death could bury James forever. I watched James until he disappeared behind the snow, swallowed up by the grey afternoon and the lawman on horseback. My wedding dress still smelled of pine and dried flowers, but my heart had turned to ice. Today was supposed to be the start of a new chapter in my life. Instead, I stood in the middle of the farmyard like a castaway, forced back into my old role. The woman rejected, unravel, left out of the main story. No, not again. I walked into the house, took off my snow-soaked wedding dress, and put on a thick cloak. On the dining table, the wedding feast was still unfinished. Half-bitten loaves of bread, untouched glasses of wine, a small handkerchief that Annie had embroidered with Mrs. Whitmore lay there, clean, unused. Saying it, I clenched my fists. I had thought that being chosen was enough, but I was wrong. Being chosen was the beginning. Fighting to keep that choice was the really important part. I went to Helena first. The cold woman looked at me not with pity, as I had feared, but with genuine respect. "I need everything he's been getting from the East lately," I said bluntly. "Old newspapers, letters, everything." "Anything unusual?" Helena didn't ask why. She just nodded, pulling a stack of letters James hadn't burned yet from the locker. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened each envelope, read each line. There were a few letters from a Boston bank, mentioning a frozen account, a newspaper clipping, just as Garrett had said, and a letter with no sender. The handwriting was different. The ink was smudged in important places. I wasn't an expert, but as someone who taught writing and calligraphy, I knew when a letter was written hastily, or by someone who deliberately tried to hide the handwriting. I took the letter to the study. On the table, James had left his farm diary, where he had recorded his work schedules, his livestock plans, and a few private notes. I compared the handwriting. No match. The letter was not James's. Yet Caroline insisted that he had written it. Why would she do that? I rapped hard on the table. An obvious question came to mind. Who would benefit most from James being arrested on his wedding day? Not Caroline. She was dead. Or not. I stood up. In the empty room, there was only the sound of the wind whistling outside the window. A hypothesis flashed. What if Caroline hadn't committed suicide? What if she had been murdered, and someone had used her death to frame the man who had loved her? That person would need to know James's past, know his old wounds, to know how to manipulate public opinion, and use fake letters to recreate the perfect drama. Who could do that? Who knew Caroline? Hated James? Had access to information in Boston? And a personal reason to destroy him? I thought of Garrett. He was there at the right time. He had the right article. He knew the right sensitive points to raise. He didn't want Caroline alive. He didn't want James married. And if Caroline was in Cheyenne, that Dyer's federal law says who knew where she was, what she was doing. I left the table and went to Mary O'Brien, woman who knew all the news in the area. Have you heard anything about Caroline Peaton in the past few days? I asked. Mary frowned. I saw a strange woman come into the blacksmith shop 2 days ago, dressed smartly, asking directions to the New Moon Hotel. It could be her. The New Moon. The only hotel in the area with bathrooms and a small library, the place where the city people chose to stay. I knew I had to go there. Immediately. On the way to the stables, I met Carlos. Where are you going? He asked. Justice. I said, not just for James, but for the truth. He said nothing more, but he handed me his sheepskin shawl and quietly tied a small leather bag to the saddle. Inside were dry rations, a small knife, and an old gun. No one had to tell me to be careful, but this time, no one stopped me. I rode toward town as the sun sank behind the white peaks. My mind was racing with questions. Caroline was dead. But was there someone behind her death? I was no longer the woman who had been turned away from the train in the bitter cold. I was no longer the unemployed teacher begging for a job. And I was no longer the one who needed saving. I was going to find the truth. Find the person who wrote the letter. The man who killed Caroline, or staged her death. The man who chose my wedding day to wreak havoc as a cruel joke. Because this time, I will not be left out of the story. I am the story, and when I find the man behind it all, he will understand. The woman who was abandoned at the train station that day is now the only one who can save a life. The killer misjudged me. Now, he will see the consequences of underestimating a rejected woman. If you have followed this far, tell me, what do you think Violet will do next? Will she find the truth behind Caroline's death and save James before it is too late? The journey of a woman who was abandoned, despised, has now become a fight for truth, for honor, and for love. Don't forget to subscribe so that when part 2 airs, you'll be the first to join me on this journey. And if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, please like to spread the message to more people.